Circulate. Thank you. You will have to do another round of applause because that was not the way I expected from the US. But we'll see. I hope that this might be my best appearance at JNUC to date. It's my 4th consecutive attempt. Obviously, a couple here thinks that I'm either funny or informative, hopefully both. I will do my best. And I'm very, very happy to be here once more. And it's fascinating to look back on these 4 years because I've basically done the same session 4 years in a row. But there's always new things that I'm able to add to it. And there are always new questions from you, the wonderful Jamf community, that you ask me and then I need to respond to them. And then I take the opportunity to do that when I can go to the US. So thank you so much for having me. And once more, I would like to start you off on a new adventure. And the feature I will be talking about today got announced last year at JNUC. And I remember that I looked something like this. I jumped out of joy because finally the feature that Microsoft introduced a while back, and I will talk more about that later on, in terms of conditional access, compliance, and all of that, finally does what it's supposed to do. But we'll get back to that soon. So let's get started by telling you a little bit of how this 45-minute session will look like and what I will give to you during these 45 minutes. So first, we'll start by going back in time and explain how we ended up in this room on this day, listening to me talking about this very topic. Many of you probably saw the churros outside and thought that this was the closest room. I'm equally happy to see you all. And that will provide you the foundation for the rest of the session. And this is supposed to be a level 300 session, so I do assume that you know parts of what I will be talking about. But if you have any questions or want me to explain that even further later on, I will give you the instructions on how we can make that happen. Then we'll get into the technology. And we will get back to what knee-deep in tech stands for later on. For the ones of you that are quick after the session, there are stickers down here. Stickers are fine to take. Penguin, hands off. And then we'll talk about how this feature, compliance within Jamf Pro, adds into the bussiest of all the buzzwords, Zero Trust, how they actually integrate, and why I see this as an absolute essential part in any organization's Zero Trust journey. And when you leave this room, I will have fulfilled these 3 goals for you. So I would have given you what you need to get going with this technology, regardless if you already have the old conditional access deployed or if this is your first interaction with compliance within Jamf Pro. And I do encourage you to go home and try this, especially if you haven't deployed conditional access previously. This is very easy to get going with, and it's something that you will get benefits from day one. I will also have explained the spider web of technologies that together form the foundation for compliance and conditional access, and also how other technologies other than Jamf and Entra ID, we'll talk about that name later as well, works together. And finally, I will have shared my experience on how we can use this technology to maximize the value and the security investments for your organization, regardless of where you are, as long as you run Jamf Pro in the cloud. So who am I? How many of you have listened to me before? Thank you. That warms my heart. So my name is Simon. I work as a principal workplace and security architect at a telco based out of Sweden. I live in Linköping, 2 hours out of Stockholm. Linköping is known for 2 things. We have Sweden's biggest chocolate factory, and we manufacture the world's best fighter jets. When I said that in San Diego last year, people were angry for some reason. I can't see why. I'm also a very odd duckling in this group because I'm a Microsoft MVP. My entire background is within Windows management. But I'm very passionate about ensuring that all devices within an organization gets the same level of attention, and that a user, regardless of which device they choose, because that is the key word here, they need to have the choice, gets the same amount of service. And therefore, I'm here because I think Jamf is the best way of managing Jamf or Mac OS devices in an enterprise. Yes, the Microsoft person just said that, even if I have Intune socks on me. I'm also an IT artist. I try to make IT beautiful, which sounds odd, but that's what I enjoy. It's a craftsmanship we do. Do podcasts and talk about all the great things that are tech. And please follow me on Twitter. I refuse to say the new name. So let's get going. Questions, you have already been given those instructions, but I also want to emphasize that if I don't have time to take questions all in all during this session, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. You will be getting all my contact details at the end of the session. You are welcome to reach out on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on email, whatever you like, and I will be happy to answer as many questions as I can. I will also follow up on the questions in the chat, and of course take as many questions as I can. The only thing you're not allowed to do is to ask your questions out loud during the session. All clear? Good. Slides, if you have any need whatsoever of my slides, you will get them. I'm here. You don't need the slides, they're just to emphasize what I'm saying, but you will be getting the slides afterwards if you like to. It's beautiful pictures, at least. And like I said, contact details at the end of the session. So this story actually starts back in 2016, and you're not required to read anything on the screen. It's just a very boring blog post from Microsoft back in 2016 when they introduced Azure AD conditional access. And without conditional access, we had basically no need for compliance, neither in Intune or Jamf Pro. And conditional access builds on the concept that if we fulfill certain conditions, get access or gets denied access to applications or data of some sort. 2 years later, Jamf expanded the partnership with Microsoft and enabled Intune administrators and Jamf Pro administrators to integrate to better secure macOS devices. That, of course, made a lot of Intune administrators very happy because they could now see more and more devices plopping up in their console, but in practice, it was still you that managed everything. And I can still remember when I saw Brad Anderson, former VP at Microsoft, on the JNUC stage introducing this partnership. And I think that was quite a shock, both in the Jamf community and within the Microsoft community. How can these collaborate? But it really started the macOS journey from Microsoft that they are still on together with Jamf. And I'm really excited for what's next as well. And I really see how both the management side and the security side, and obviously the identity side as well, really works well together. So, what's changed over time? And what's especially changed from last year until now? So first and foremost, Microsoft changed their mind. So instead of having people like myself being very, very happy for having all of the devices within Intune, Microsoft realized, in my opinion, that let's leave the Macs where they're supposed to be in Jamf Pro, and we will take care of what we do best, the compliance parts and the identity side of things. So instead of both having the cake and eating it, they changed their mind and integrated in a new way with Jamf and other partners as well. So instead of being the core of this solution, which they did not in the most efficient way, they are now instead the glue that connects Jamf Pro to Entra ID, to Intune, and to the greater security posture of an organization. And the most important thing, the way the integration has been done now means that we have a remarkable speed when it comes to evaluating compliance and actually making it actionable. That is a true game changer, and I will explain why a little later. But we have waited long enough, both you in the room and you that are following us over the stream. Really happy to have all of you with us today as well. So let's get into the technology side of this. And I will take you through 5 steps. We'll start with the migration. And one of the most challenging things about speaking here is that I need to complete my slide deck by July. So things have changed, thankfully. And I will point out what's changed. And all changes have been good, but it's just that I have to jump through a couple of slides. We'll head into the configuration of that integration of compliance. We'll go through smart group tactics because here I'm not at all in agreement with Jamf. And I will tell you why. We'll talk about the user onboarding. That's seen a great improvement just since July. We have seen it probably in several other sessions during the event. And finally, we'll look at the bigger picture. So what does this enable you as macOS administrators or security professionals, or both, to do? So the first step is the migration and the possible cleanup. Because if you already are on the old conditional access side of this, how many of you have deployed conditional access within Jamf Pro? Good amount, yes. So you will have to do a migration, and you might need to do a cleanup dependent on how you actually took yourself to the conditional access stage. So to make it very, very clear, this is Jamf Pro. This is the old thing. And I've been taught over the years, I've been a trainer in all sorts of things. I'm actually a professional dance instructor. I don't think you believe that, but I can teach you a number of Swedish dances if you like. You should never show something you shouldn't do, but this is the old thing. We will be moving away from that, and instead moving towards the new device compliance. So, when I wrote this, there weren't a clear migration path, and you got a small warning stating that. Now the migration is simpler, but for a lot of organizations, it will be sort of a big bang to get there. I was fortunate enough to have a brain date earlier today on Microsoft and Jamf partnerships, and we had discussions on that migration. And I do think that you should be prepared for a big bang, so where you move everything from the old to the new. But with the new onboarding experience, that should be relatively simple. The person I was fortunate enough to speak to said that they did this on thousands of users, and it worked very, very well. So now we have a much clearer migration path, which both Microsoft and Jamf acknowledges. So basically what you do is when you're ready to do all of this, do prepare everything I later will tell you to do when you set up compliance. Do as much of that first. Create your device groups, ensure that conditional access works, ensure to test your smart groups and all of that. And then when you're ready to move, you disable the old conditional access feature by clicking the box and pressing save. I know every time someone presses save, something bad happens, especially if you do it on a Friday. A little while later, in Intune, it will look like this. The connection has been terminated. At this stage, it might be so, it were when I did this migration, that it took a while for it to actually understand that this has happened. We'll get back to that also when we talk about the groupings and so on. So be prepared for a slight timing issue. I hope that Jamf have been working on that so that it's now not a delay for when you terminate this. And then you should also note the app ID. Because especially if you did this manually when you set up conditional access, you had the option of doing it with a wizard from Jamf Pro, or you could do it manually if you needed that more, like needed to have more control over the setup. So if you have created your own Azure AD apps or Entra ID, take note of that application ID because we will need it later. And also ensure to remove the group which was previously targeted by this feature. Then you head into your enterprise applications, or you ask your kind global admin to do so. And if you aren't good friends with your global Entra ID admin today, ensure to buy he or she a good box of chocolate, preferably Swedish. And do note, Swedish, not Swiss. It's two different countries. Yes, I still get to hear that, even from Europeans, which is quite remarkable. So when you have removed all of the old stuff, it's time to set up the new and perhaps shinier compliance. So we head to device compliance, and this is a very simple approach. What we need to have are two device groups within Jamf Pro. we select, I will focus on Mac OS in this session. iOS and iPad OS is almost similar, but I will focus on Mac OS. We select our, there we go, compliant device group. This is the smart group where all devices that are compliant should reside. And we'll get back to that later on when we talk about the smart group tactics. So devices that are compliant should be in the group. They are allowed to be part of this very exclusive group of compliant devices. Prepare that group in advance. You should also have an applicable group. That means which devices within Jamf Pro should be targeted by compliance. So you can choose to separate these if you like. It might be that you don't have licenses for every device, or some other reason where you don't want to evaluate it. So you need two groups. And in my instance, I have all managed clients. It's also important, and I will emphasize that later on, in Jamf Pro, a lot of things are focused on the device. In Intune, almost everything is focused on users. That is a very complicated difference, which I still educate a lot of organizations on. Stop targeting devices within Intune. So if you have Intune administrators within your organizations and they do device-based targeting, tell them to reach out to me and I'll explain why they shouldn't. Once we have set this up, we need to connect Jamf Pro to Intune. Sorry, we do that by opening the consent URL. That will basically ask Entra ID for us to authenticate and acknowledge that this will create some apps for us. And those apps need some permissions to be able to read the information and also update the compliance state of the devices. This is very well documented, so if you have Entra ID or security administrators that are question why you're doing this, you can give them the information and they will know exactly what to do and what you actually grant permission for them to do. But this is something a global admin needs to do because it affects the entire organization. When that's done, and also, for the ones of you that wonder, last year I was standing on stage and talked about Endpoint Manager. That was one of the names where Microsoft, after 3 years or so, realized that was a bad name change. So it was Intune up until 2019. It has been Endpoint Manager for a couple of years, and now we're back to Intune. It's at least in the right direction. So we head to Intune. In Intune, we need to set up a new compliance partner. This is the new way of handling compliance with other UEMs, so Unified Endpoint Management Tools, than Intune. We can do this based on, so we do this per platform. So we do this in this case for Mac OS. That means that we can have different setups for iOS and Mac OS. And we can also actually have multiple instances of either Jamf Pro or other UEMs as compliance partners. We then need to include a group. And again, this is Intune. So what do we target, devices or users? Users, well done, you're listening. So here we need to have a user group for users that are using Mac OS devices which you manage with Jamf Pro. So here you can actually also separate it. If you have some Mac OS devices that should be in Intune, the people you really don't like, or you can have Mac OS devices in Jamf Pro, the people you do like. Simple to remember. Once that is done, we have a priority. So we have Jamf Pro compliance, which is the highest priority, and everything that's not targeted to that will end up having Intune as the sole system to ensure that the devices are compliant. And then hopefully we get a green box, and we're done. So it's a very simple setup. This is well documented by both Microsoft and Jamf, so you can decide which route you want to take. They say the same thing, but if you prefer one or the other, that's up to you. So when this is done, we now have the relationship between Intune, Entra ID, and Jamf Pro set up. And let me explain this before I continue. Intune, the only thing Intune will do in this is to ensure that the information that goes from Jamf gets to Entra ID. Intune acts as the glue between the solutions. It's the solution that integrates everything else. It's actually Entra ID, where you will see the devices that are targeted, and where you will see the compliance state of these devices. You won't see them in Intune. So if you currently use conditional access, you change this within Jamf Pro, your Intune admins will freak out because they just lost all of their macOS devices. Let them know that beforehand. Smart groups. This is what really drives the entire compliance state. And this is what also makes it so powerful. How many of you have worked with compliance in Microsoft Intune? A few of you, yeah. It's very limited for macOS. There are very few things that you actually can evaluate. It's much more on Windows, obviously. But with Jamf, we have the opportunity to evaluate whatever we want. It's just based on the smart groups you create. So, my strong recommendation is to create a smart group that looks something like this. Oh, sorry. Let's go back. So basically, this smart group does only get members from other smart groups or static groups. I have not a single thing that's evaluated on the specific compliance group. And I will explain why shortly. You don't have to make it the exact way, but what I basically have done here is that I have computer groups, I set the operator to not member of, and then a value. So if, and it also needs to be and. So if a computer is a member of any of these, they won't be a member of the compliant group. They are non-compliant. And if someone ends up in one of these groups, they should be removed. The documentation states that you should check this box, which is basically send a notification on your compliance group. I once had a carpenter at home. He built my new kitchen. And we had a discussion when he was drinking coffee. And he complained over like, yeah, you know, Simon, I get so many emails. You know, I can get 10 per day. And I said nothing, and after that coffee, I had 10 new emails. Any of you need more emails? No, I don't think so. And especially if you have a big environment, thousands of devices, you really don't want this checkbox checked, I promise you, because you will be getting tons of email, especially if you evaluate updated devices, as an example. So instead, set the notification on each smart group that you evaluate. So in this case, it's file vault not enabled, and I'm interested in knowing why a device is not compliant. I care very little about if a device is compliant or not. I want to know why. And if you have these groups, so the groups that actually evaluate the situation for the device and send notifications on them, it will be much more valuable to you. And you can also build a lot of automation built on this. So set the notifications per thing you evaluate that then adds up into the compliant state. That is my strong recommendation. You also don't want to mix, and this is the same regardless if you do Jamf Pro or Intune, you don't want to mix the evaluations in one group, because that will make it very, very hard both for you to know what's actually gone wrong, and also to inform the users about what they need to do to be compliant again. So therefore, you might end up with a big group of devices. So in my case, I evaluate file vault, firewall. I have a static group where I can add devices that are stolen, or at least where the user don't know where they are. And I also have a group for Jamf Protect. But you can, of course, make this as advanced as you like. And I had a great discussion yesterday. You know, my manager thinks I'm here just to go out and drink good things and eat good things in the evenings, but I actually do work in the evenings as well. So I had a really good discussion at one of the parties yesterday where we talked about that this is also a great opportunity to delegate out compliance to various departments or countries or parts of your organization. Because you only have one compliance group. And if you are a spread out organization, Everyone needs to add or remove devices from this. So what you could do is, of course, chain these different groups in a hierarchy and say that for Europe, they can have these 4 groups. That's added to one smart group, and that in turn has a membership in the compliance smart group. So think this through before you start to set it up. And this is one of the things that I see a lot of errors in general for compliance. And it's also important to say "and," which incidentally were the topic of the keynote yesterday. That was actually not at all planned. But "and" is the key word here. Because you want everything of this to be true, to be compliant. And if one of these things aren't true, then you want it to be non-compliant, and you fix that some way. So time for our users to work. Once you have started up with compliance, the users actually need to do some things. This is what's really changed. The first thing you still need to have is the company portal. You still need to have it. The users won't do that much with it. But exactly as it is with Authenticator on iOS, that acts as a broker for Intune and Jamf Pro and Entra ID. So you need to ensure that the company portal is installed. You can do that through Jamf. And then you register the device to MS Intune. The user signs in, and now this is what's changed quite significantly, both on the Jamf Pro side, but also with the platform SSO, that you now don't need to jump through all of this. It's basically sign in, Entra ID sign in, and you're done. And I know that you're working super hard on making this even easier. So today, it's a relatively simple onboarding. And since we're using Entra ID, we can do this passwordless if we so desire, which is nice. Let's jump through that. Now, we talked about speed. This is Entra, so formerly Azure AD. I hate that name change. Like, the reasoning behind it is very good. Microsoft wanted to make it clear that everything is now an ID in Azure. So regardless if it's a user, a device, or whatever, it's an ID. But I don't see why they needed to change it to Entra. So my MacBook now is compliant. If I add my computer to my stolen device group, or if it, for whatever other reason, goes out of compliance, this will update within less than a minute in most cases. This is fascinating. Because if I do this, do you know, like Microsoft develops an operating system. Have you heard about it? Yeah. So Microsoft develops an operating system. They develop a UEM that manages that operating system. And still, when they do compliance, if something changes on a Windows device managed by Intune, it can take a minute or 8 hours. And I don't know about you, but if I work with security, I don't want to know about the device that's gone non-compliant 8 hours after it went so. So Microsoft can't even do the same performance as Jamf can on their own operating system. And this is an important change. The speed that we can get for Mac OS with Jamf Pro and Entra is simply remarkable. And that enables us to do so many more things than we could previously, where it could take anything from 1 minute to 8 hours. So, conditional access. It is not easy. I have worked with conditional access since 2016. I have so far not found a single organization that have done it right from the start. And we heard that in the sessions yesterday. I heard that during the brain dates today, that there are things within conditional access that breaks most things. If I can't get coffee in the morning, it's likely conditional access. It is hard. So when you implement this, ensure to have a plan, a strategy, and start with the basics. And I know that many of you in this room might not be the person that actually manages conditional access within your organization. And I know that that is complicated because you need to speak to another department or another group, and they won't understand what you're trying to do. And they are also very fixed in their mindset. So I'm more than happy to collaborate on conditional access and how you can set it up. After this session, I will go into a little deeper soon. But first, let's talk about compliance and things that I find that a lot of organizations, in my opinion, do wrong. So this checkbox, you find it under compliance policies within Intune and compliance policy settings. And I know it's tiny. It says mark devices with no compliance policy assigned as. This is set to compliant by default, which means that if you don't target a user which has a device with a compliance policy, it doesn't matter how that device looks, it will always be seen as compliant. The reason for that being there as a default is that you shouldn't be locked out when you start with Intune. Change that to not compliant. That is the recommended setting by Microsoft, by me, and that ensures that you don't get into a situation where you did some error when you created your groups, and that leaves an open gate for attackers. If they just find a user account that isn't targeted, whichever device they're using will be seen as compliant regardless of how it looks. So I'm a very odd person. I love to work with conditional access. I'm also one of the odd persons that loved to work with GPOs on Windows, that loves to talk about Microsoft licensing. Yeah, I know. I can't understand what my wife sees in me. But we celebrated our 11th anniversary just recently, so it must be something. Oh, thank you. So when you start with this, start simple. And this has changed since last JNUC. Previously, we had a specific condition which said compliant device or hybrid join device for Windows. That is now gone. So if you have that configured in your conditional access policies, you need to migrate to the new filter for devices. Filters gives you a huge new opportunity, but the most important thing, especially for you, when we talk about macOS, is to set the new way of finding compliant devices. Do that as soon as you leave this session or that you leave JNUC, because at some point that will be deprecated, and then I don't know what will happen to your conditional access policies. Probably a lot of users will either be very angry because they can't do anything, or they will be very happy because they can do whatever their hearts desire. I don't know what's worse. Also, ensure to exclude devices that are compliant. So do not include in conditional access. So as you can see here, we want to exclude filter devices from policies, and device compliant is equal true. If you want to learn more about conditional access, we'll go into some more details soon, but you can actually still watch my session from last year's JNUC where we did a focus session on conditional access specifically. And I would also encourage you to look into the, I can't remember the name of it, but the session that Microsoft and Jamf did yesterday, just after the keynote, where they also have a good amount of learnings from conditional access. But one of the takeaways from there, which I think is one of the most essentials, are that if you have session control activated, which basically means that you force users to sign in on a continuous basis, that might ruin a lot of things. Same if you are, like we had in the discussion on the brain date, if someone in your organization decided that it was a good thing to have a block all apps in certain policies. All apps, it's all apps. It's APIs, it's everything you could possibly need that will break things you couldn't even imagine you had. So be very, very careful with that. So ensure to set up your smart groups correctly. Ensure to configure conditional access correctly. And do remember that some things that worked previously when Intune were in charge doesn't work anymore. In another session yesterday, we had a question on, previously if you said, I want my devices to be on a specific Mac OS version. In Intune, you have a grace period that you can configure. So basically you said, I want my devices to be on a certain version of Mac OS, and I will give my users 7 days to get to that point. After 7 days, they will be marked as not compliant, but they will get notified on day 1 that you are now in grace period, you need to update to this version. That feature no longer exists in the new compliance feature. So you have to be smarter when you set that up. If you want to evaluate on Mac OS version, you will have to build a logic that gives your users the opportunity to actually remediate. Otherwise, every time there's a new Mac OS release, your users will all be locked out until they are updated, and they won't like that. So there are things that have changed that you need to take into account. Smart groups will be essential for this to work and to get the full power out of this, and to get the speed out of it. Because to me, speed is what really creates zero trust. And when I actually do a session back home in Sweden where I talk about zero trust from buzzword to reality. It's a very popular session. Because I'm certain that many of you have had that salesperson coming out and say, I just want to sell you zero trust. It's super easy. You take this, our order book, check every single box, give me a huge amount of money, and you have zero trust. That's not how it works. Zero trust, to me, is about integrating your entire infrastructure so that you can be data-driven, that you can be real-time, and that it's earned trust, so that we continuously evaluate both your user and your device, real-time, and grant or take back access to data in practice. This creates a quite complicated web, but you now have a great addition to that with Intune. Because Intune has for 10 years integrated with things like Cisco, Fortinet, Aruba, a lot of other things with compliance. So when you now can take Jamf Pro, do your magic with it with the smart groups, send that data in real time to Entra and or Intune, you can now build network access control solutions that actually works real time based on Jamf Pro. You can now start to control a lot more things, a lot easier with integrations that are probably already there. VPN access as an example. So with the Jamf Pro's smart groups, that enables you to be very granular or simplified. You get access to this amazing web of technologies that are already integrated with Intune, that you can extend upon, and you can be a core part of security. Because you can do things that Microsoft can't do with Windows. You can be the leader in your organization when it comes to security. And I've said this before, I'm here to show you the brightest minds, obviously since you're here, of the Apple device management ecosystem, that you most likely already have access to this. Because you only need Intune and Azure AD P1 licenses. If you have Business Premium, if you have E5, E3, F3, A3 licenses, we can go through that. Like I said, I love it. Later on, you have access to this without any additional licenses. So again, you have the ring. Why not use it? Some Lord of the Rings fans here, obviously. Thank you. And you don't have to license all of your organization either. That is up to you. So with that, it's time to summarize. I have given you the starting point, regardless of where you are in your compliance journey. And if you haven't started yet, I highly encourage you to get going, because this is something that will change the entire security estate in your organization. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Start simple. The most important things can be done first, just by checking if a device is outdated or not. Jamf and Microsoft is still a strong combination, even though the partnership has had its ups and downs. Which relationship doesn't have that? Speaking about my marriage again. From a security point of view, I can't see a better combination for Mac OS than Microsoft and Jamf. And many of you already have access to the licenses and the technology, so start using it. And finally, which is the main reason why I'm here for the fourth time, we need to work as a team. I felt so welcomed into the Jamf community since I got here in person last year. And I'm sick and tired of organizations that tries to separate Mac OS and security, or separate Mac OS from Windows. We need to work together, otherwise we will never ever succeed, and we will be stronger as a team. So I've given you what you need to get going, and if you feel that I haven't, please come up to me afterwards, and I'm happy to answer questions. I will be here until Saturday, I think, and you can reach out to me on the contact details you will get later. This is a web of compliance, but with Jamf Pro, Entra ID, and Microsoft Intune, together with the rest of the technologies, this will be the true cornerstone of Zero Trust. And it will also help you to maximize value of the investments many of you already have made. So this is one of the most powerful tools that Jamf and Microsoft have created for you. If you aren't using it, seriously consider why you aren't. And if you are, you have a unique opportunity to make a huge difference for your users, for your team, and for your country. Thank you so much for listening. It's been great having you again, and you can reach me here.
Thank you very much. We do have a couple questions, more than a couple, but still. Do all I still can't get used to saying that. Do all Entra ID compliance policies have to be recreated with the filter options in advance, since devices will no longer show an Intune?
Great question. Yes, you will have to change your conditional access policies, or that's my recommendation that you do it beforehand. You still need to do it. You need to do it today, and if you don't migrate. But it won't have any impact on your devices as long as you do it correctly. So do change it before you make the migration, because it will benefit you today as well. And you don't have to recreate them. It's about reconfiguring them.
Thank you. What are the conditional access policies we should apply for Zero Trust? How do we ensure only company-approved purchases are enrolled and not anyone else?
That is a great question, and when it comes to enrolling devices, that's something you configure within Jamf Pro, what you allow or not allow. You can, in Microsoft Intune, do some filtering on how devices has been enrolled as well. But I would say that the main point we're trying to get to here is that compliance state within Jamf Pro. So if you state that a bring your own device, as an example, should never be seen as compliant, I'm not saying that you should do that, but you could. You can use extension attributes or something like that to create the setup you want. Then within conditional access, the only thing you need to think of is really compliant or not. So all the logic is done in Jamf Pro, and then you say compliant or not within conditional access.
Okay, here's another one. I put an answer on this one myself, but from higher education or K-12 who are using Intune integration with Jamf Pro, you say the target users, however, what if your Jamf instance is being used in labs where the users, students, are not the Mac primary user? Would you still be user pointed? So for conditional access and compliance, you still need to be user targeted, because what you're trying to protect is a user accessing a certain resource from a device. So in a lab environment, if you aren't signing in to anything as a user, you don't have to use the feature.
because it's not the device-based compliance to that extent. And with Jamf Pro, you obviously target devices. So for conditional access, you will always target users. And if you aren't signing in to any service protected by conditional access, you don't need to think about that in a lab setup. But if you have any follow-up questions on that, please reach out to me, and I will write a longer answer in the chat as well.
Perfect. This one here, can you discuss what needs to be reset if there is a failed enrollment or if the device doesn't show compliant after going through the enrollment? Do we need only to delete the records from the Azure AD and Intune? What needs to be reset on the Mac to start from scratch?
That's a question that's been asked in, I think, most of the sessions so far. You should only need to go through the registration again. That's what I've seen and that's what I've heard during the conference again. So you don't need to do anything in Entra. You don't need to do anything like in Jamf Pro either. You should mainly do it by re-registering the device in the same flow as when you registered it the first time. It will then figure out which device it were from the start, and you can continue from there. What we have seen, and like I mentioned, is that if you have session control policies, that might break it. And it might also be if you have a conditional access policy that blocks sign-in from non-compliant devices. That might actually destroy the relationship. So if you continuously see this on your devices or on the same device, first and foremost, check your existing conditional access policies so that they aren't destroying the relationship. If conditional access is okay and you don't see anything in the logs and so on, and you still get to that point and you have re-registered a number of times, reach out to Jamf support, I would say.
And I've been doing this for the last 2 days,
Yep.
and this is the first. So a bunch of emojis with thumbs up saying, what an amazing talk, thank you. So I thought that would be kind of cool to say in Q&A.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I think, do you think I have one more question? Because we're going to break after this, so if you
Yeah,
don't mind.
I have time.
Okay. So here, no, we can answer that in post. What's your recommendations for notifying users as non-compliant?
So,
and why not email? Sorry.
Email can be quite complicated. In Intune, when you send the emails that you're either in grace period or not compliant, that email will actually bypass conditional access, so you can get only that email into Exchange. But that's because Microsoft owns it all. When you do it, and the device gets non-compliant, and you require the device to be compliant to be signed into Exchange, it might be complicated to get the email. So therefore, you could probably use other tools within Jamf Pro or open source tools to nudge users that something is wrong. So email is absolutely fine for certain conditions, depending on what you will block them from. But definitely notify the user if you are not going to take care of it for them, because that would be my first advice. If you can automate the remediation, that is, of course, the absolute best user experience. But depending on what you are evaluating, it might also be so that the user has to do it themselves. And then please inform them that you won't get access to email before you do this. Otherwise, they will probably ring their manager, and that manager will call your manager, and yeah, you know how it goes.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And there are stickers up front if you want them.